When a man sees a stray dog while out walking, he feels compelled to help the poor animal. He offers it food and reaches out to stroke the hungry dog's head. What the dog does next leaves the man in tears. Robert strolled along the riverbank, quietly listening to the soft crunch of gravel beneath his shoes. He often found himself out walking for hours on end along the same path. At times, the quiet and solitude of his empty home became too much for him to bear. His wife had passed away a few months earlier, and since they had never had kids together, he was now all alone in the world. When he returned home from work to an empty house, his heart would sink at the prospect of another evening alone with just his thoughts. So, he would often go out and take solace in having a quick chat with the other walkers, or just in hearing the evening birdsong. But as he enjoyed the warm summer evening, his eyes caught sight of a sad figure in the distance. A German shepherd, thin and disheveled, stood alone on the riverbank, its wary eyes scanning the surroundings. The creature's fur was matted and dull, evidence that it was a stray and probably had been for some time. Robert was used to seeing a lot of dogs out on his walks, and for some time he'd been wondering if a dog would help ease his loneliness. He and his wife had always wanted to get a pet, but they'd had busy work lives and believed it wasn't fair to keep a dog alone in the house all day long. A year ago, they'd both decided to reduce their work hours and had started to look around animal shelters for their perfect companion, but not long after his wife had gotten sick, and all thoughts of getting a dog disappeared. Robert felt a pang of sympathy for the lonely dog. It was clearly weak and thirsty and was slowly drinking from the river. He stood back, not wanting to startle it, but then the dog turned and locked eyes with him. There was a mix of fear and hunger in its gaze. Used to being ignored or mistreated by humans, the animal continued drinking. Robert decided to sit down on the riverbank and watch the dog from a distance. He was lost in his thoughts and for a while forgot that he still had his work backpack on his shoulders. He reached into a pocket and pulled out some food. He approached the dog with slow steps and, with a gentle gesture, offered some of it to the shepherd lying flat on the ground. Despite being torn between hunger and mistrust, the dog tentatively inched closer and sniffed the offered meal. Starving and weary, the dog couldn't resist the temptation of food any longer. It had been a long time since she'd had a proper meal, and she decided to take the risk of approaching the man. She took the small sack from Robert's hand and then darted back down the riverbank to eat away from him. It was pretty clear that she had been mistreated by humans in the past, and Robert tried to look as harmless as possible. However, she was still scared of him. He couldn't know about her past, but the truth was that the German shepherd had been born into a loving family. Her birth had been highly anticipated by the owners, who had proudly reared shepherds for several generations. But as soon as they had seen her, they had realized that she would never become one of their prized dogs who went on to winning competitions. She was simply too small. So they had gotten rid of her, and she had started living on the streets. She had met many other strays that had taught her the ways of the streets, but also many other humans who had shooed her away when she had gone looking for love and warmth. She had been kicked once too many times, and her painful hunger was the only reason why she was standing so close to another human. But weirdly enough, he was doing the opposite of shooing her. When she'd finished eating the first snack, he offered more. The dog once again drew nearer, a little less cautiously this time, as if she realized this man was different from those who had hurt her before. Robert's hand, now empty of food, moved gently to stroke the dog's head. At first, the canine flinched, expecting to be hurt like she had been so many times before. However, as Robert's touch remained tender and kind, the dog began to relax in front of him. Her guard began to crumble, and with each stroke, a sense of trust replaced the fear that she'd first felt. Robert could tell the dog was starting to relax, and was pleased to see that she was starting to trust him. But then, she did something that he hadn't expected. He watched as the once timid animal lay down beside him, her head resting on his lap. As Robert looked down at the poor dog, he could see the sadness in her eyes. It was clear that she had struggled for a long time, and yet there was still hope in her heart. Robert's own eyes filled with tears as he realized just how much this dog strived to be loved. Knowing he couldn't leave her alone on the streets, Robert saw no other option but to take her home. He already knew what he wanted to call her. It was a name his wife had always favored, but now the word had taken on a new meaning for him too. He bent down towards the dog's head and whispered that he would call her Star, and that they would be friends until the end of their lives. At this, he noticed her tail had slowly started to wag, as if she was giving her approval to both the name and the promise. He slowly stood up, and after some gentle coaxing, Star did the same. She was still unsure what to do next though, but the man continued to stroke her, and she felt that everything was going to be okay. A few minutes passed, and Star seemed to feel better about the situation. So, when Robert set off walking, she walked by his side and followed him all the way home. She was hesitant at first in the unfamiliar surroundings, but as days passed, she transformed. Robert cleaned her up, nursed her back to health, and provided a warmth the dog had never known. With regular meals, a warm and comfy bed, and lots of toys to play with, Star was like a different dog. Some of Robert's friends had warned him that, given the dog was a stray, her behavior might be unpredictable, but now they couldn't believe the change that was taking place in front of their eyes. They were amazed that a dog who had been so cruelly treated by humans could still show so much love and trust. In just a week, Star's physical appearance changed drastically. Her coat was now glossy, and her body regained the healthy weight it had lost after years of scavenging for scraps. But it wasn't just her physical appearance that had changed. Her confidence had grown. With each day that passed, Star became less nervous and transformed into a loyal companion to Robert. He made sure to spend lots of time playing with her and taking her on walks, giving her all the stimulation that she'd never had. He'd expected it would be difficult to train her, given that she'd probably only ever had negative interactions, but to his surprise, Star displayed great intelligence and a calm nature, learning his commands with ease. Not a day went by when Robert wasn't grateful for meeting the German Shepherd. He'd picked her name in memory of his wife, but also because from their very first meeting, he'd sensed that the dog would bring some light back into his life. But she wasn't the only one that had changed over the weeks. Robert was also transformed. Once sad and lonely, in time, he became the happy, fun-loving guy he'd once been. Losing his wife was still hard to deal with, but having Star by his side gave him a whole new purpose in life. She was something to get out of bed for, something to love and care for. Star's companionship helped ease the worry his friends had felt for him. They knew she was a positive presence in his life. The man had been so wrapped up in grief and misery that he hadn't realized how much she'd changed. Star had given him back the life he'd once had, as well as the new experiences that dog ownership inevitably brought with it. Each day, the bond between the pair grew stronger. Robert had believed that he was rescuing Star, and was sure that he was now giving her a much better life than the one she'd had living on the streets. What he hadn't expected was that the dog would also rescue him right back. Now it's over to you. What do you think of this story? Do you think that Star could sense that Robert needed a companion? We would love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video.